Just 1 minute ago, a moment unfolded that no one inside the royal orbit ever expected to see. Prince Harry, once the most protected royal in Britain, stood at the gates of Windsor Castle and was told a single devastating word: no. Not delayed, not questioned, denied. Palace security, stone-faced and unmoving, blocked his path as if he were a stranger. And in that instant, the illusion of reconciliation collapsed entirely. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The denial was not loud. It wasn't theatrical. That was what made it so brutal. No raised voices, no visible confrontation, just a quiet refusal delivered with practiced finality. The kind of refusal that doesn't invite discussion. Windsor Castle is not just stone and history, it is the emotional core of the monarchy, a place where belonging is silently assumed for those born into it. And yet, in that moment, Prince Harry was treated as someone who no longer belonged, his presence reduced to a problem to be managed rather than a son returning home. Those nearby felt it immediately. Aides froze. Staff exchanged glances they weren't supposed to share. Everyone understood that something irreversible was happening in real time. Harry's reaction told its own story. What began as expectation shifted into confusion, then hardened into disbelief. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He hadn't come prepared to negotiate entry to a place that once opened for him without question. And yet there he was, standing still as the meaning of that refusal settled in. The security team did not flinch. They did not explain. They did not apologize. Their posture made one thing unmistakably clear: this was not personal. And that made it even colder. They were acting under direct authority, executing a decision already signed off somewhere far beyond the gates. What makes this moment so unsettling is how controlled it felt. Nothing about the exchange suggested hesitation or surprise. There were no hurried phone calls, no whispered consultations. The response was immediate, rehearsed, and precise, as if the palace had been waiting for this exact scenario. That detail alone changes everything. Because spontaneous misunderstandings can be corrected. Planned denials cannot. And in the silence that followed, it became impossible to ignore the truth that this was not about timing, logistics, or protocol. It was about power, boundaries, and a message that needed to be delivered without words. For those watching from a distance, this may look like a single incident. But for the people who understand the internal language of the palace, it was something else entirely. It was a line being drawn. A signal sent not just to Harry, but to everyone inside and outside the institution. A reminder that access is conditional, that blood does not guarantee belonging, and that once trust is deemed broken, even a prince can be stopped at the gate. And as Harry stood there, absorbing the weight of that realization, one thing became painfully clear. This moment didn't begin at the gate, and it wouldn't end there either. But this moment didn't come out of nowhere, because behind those iron gates, decisions had already been made long before Harry arrived. Prince Harry didn't arrive at Windsor by accident. He wasn't wandering. He wasn't confused. He came with purpose and urgency. Sources whisper that this visit was never cleared, never welcomed, and never acknowledged inside palace walls. Whatever Harry believed was waiting for him inside, the reality was far harsher, because the palace knew he was coming, and chose silence. That silence is where the story truly begins. Harry's decision to show up without confirmation was not reckless, it was desperate. Desperate in the way only someone backed into an emotional corner dares to be. There are whispers of an urgent family matter that could not wait for emails or intermediaries, a private appeal he believed could only be made face-to-face, or even a confrontation he felt had been delayed too long. Whatever the reason, this was not a casual visit. This was a calculated risk, taken by someone who believed blood would still count for something when protocol did not. Inside the palace, The mood reportedly shifted the moment word spread that Harry was en route. Aides who hadn't spoken his name in weeks suddenly found themselves exchanging clipped messages and careful glances. Not because they were unprepared, but because they were. The most telling detail is that no senior royal agreed to receive him. Not one. No meeting room was prepared. No private assurance was sent. The absence of response was the response, and that silence spoke volumes about where Harry now stood in the internal hierarchy of the monarchy. By the time his car approached the gates, security had already been briefed. That detail changes everything. This wasn't a situation unfolding in real time, it was a scenario anticipated and managed before it could spiral. The instruction was clear enough to remove hesitation. Harry wasn't to be delayed. He wasn't to be redirected. He was to be stopped. And that suggests something far more serious than discomfort. It suggests that his presence itself had become unacceptable. What makes this moment so emotionally loaded is the gamble Harry took by showing up uninvited. He knew the risks. He understood the tension. But he came anyway, believing that showing up still mattered, that the act itself might force a conversation the palace had been avoiding. Instead, it appears to have crossed an internal red line, one unspoken but firmly enforced. A line that separates family from liability and loyalty from containment. And as Harry stood waiting, believing that anyone might intervene, the machinery of the institution continued to move without him. Not hurried, not panicked. Calm, controlled, deliberate. The kind of movement that signals a decision already finalized, long before his arrival ever became visible. And as Harry waited at the gates, the real power inside the palace was already moving against him. Palace security does not improvise. Every step, every denial, every closed gate comes from instruction often written, sometimes verbal, always deliberate. So when Prince Harry was stopped cold at Windsor, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an order. And the identity of who authorized that order may be more explosive than the denial itself. Inside the palace, security operates on a hierarchy that leaves no room for interpretation. Commands move downward, never sideways. Guards do not decide who belongs, they enforce who is allowed. Which is why this moment sent such a chill through those who understood the system. For Harry to be denied access, a decision had to be made far above the men standing at the gate. That decision would have passed through layers of authority, filtered through protocol officers, senior aides, and ultimately approved at the highest level. Nothing about this was accidental. Nothing about it was casual. Whispers have already begun circulating about a sealed directive quietly issued, tightly held, and never meant to surface. A directive that reportedly addressed Harry by name, not as a visiting dignitary, but as a variable to be controlled. The language, according to those familiar with it, was chillingly simple. No exceptions. No discretion. No last-minute appeals. That phrasing alone reveals the mindset behind the move. This wasn't about managing a situation as it unfolded. It was about preventing one from happening at all. What makes this even more unsettling is how conflicted the security team themselves allegedly felt. These were individuals trained to protect Harry for most of their careers. Men who once stood between him and danger without hesitation. And yet now, they were placed in an impossible position, emotionally conflicted, but institutionally trapped. They could not bend, they could not explain, they could only comply. And compliance, in this case, meant enforcing a boundary that felt deeply personal, even if it was delivered impersonally. The words "no exceptions" carry weight inside royal walls. They are not used lightly. They signal that debate has already happened elsewhere and has ended decisively. That someone with unquestioned authority has closed the discussion entirely, which raises the most uncomfortable implication of all. This decision likely involved senior royal power, not advisors acting alone, not overzealous officials, but figures who understood exactly what message this would send and approved it anyway. That message wasn't about safety, If it were, alternatives would have been offered. Controlled access, supervised entry, delayed timing. None were. Instead, the response was absolute, which suggests the real issue wasn't risk, it was control. Control over narrative, control over access, control over who gets to cross the threshold into the heart of the monarchy and who is kept firmly outside it. And once control becomes the priority, compassion becomes optional. The palace didn't just deny entry, it asserted dominance. It reminded Harry and everyone watching closely that proximity to power is a privilege that can be revoked without explanation, that blood ties do not override institutional authority, and that whatever Harry once was to the monarchy, he is now something that must be managed, restricted, and contained. But to understand why the palace drew this line, we have to confront what Harry represents to them now. There was a time when Prince Harry could walk these grounds without question, when doors opened before he even knocked. Today he is treated not as family but as a liability. Somewhere along the way, the palace stopped seeing Harry as a son, a brother, a prince, and started seeing him as a threat. That shift did not happen overnight. It crept in quietly, through meetings that never made headlines and conversations that ended the moment he entered a room. Palace officials, once protective to the point of instinct, began to reassess him not through loyalty but through risk. In that internal calculus, Harry's value was no longer measured by duty fulfilled or sacrifice given, but by unpredictability, by what he might say, by what might follow him out of the room once the doors closed again. The fear that now surrounds him is not about his intentions, but about exposure. Private conversations, once sacred within royal walls, are now viewed as potential liabilities simply by his presence. Every exchange carries an unspoken question: will this remain here? That fear has reshaped behavior in subtle but devastating ways. Invitations grew fewer. Conversations became guarded. Even the tone shifted from familial warmth to cautious neutrality. Trust, once assumed, had to be earned again, and even then, it was never fully restored. That distrust has been fueled by memory, by past revelations that linger like ghosts in the corridors of the institution, by disclosures that, regardless of motive, left the palace feeling vulnerable and exposed. Within an organization built on control and silence, vulnerability is unforgivable. And so Harry, once celebrated for his openness, found that same trait being rebranded as recklessness. What was once praised as honesty is now quietly labeled as uncontrollable. Staff feel it too. Anxiety follows him into spaces where it never existed before, not because of who he is, but because of what his presence represents now. A disruption. A question mark. An emotional wildcard. For aides whose survival depends on discretion, proximity to Harry feels like standing too close to a fault line. They don't doubt his sincerity, they doubt the consequences. And in the palace, consequences are everything. The emotional toll of this redefinition is impossible to ignore. To be told without words that you are no longer trusted cuts deeper than public criticism ever could. Harry isn't just excluded from rooms, he's excluded from the version of himself the palace once accepted. Being labelled uncontrolled strips away dignity, agency, and belonging all at once. It turns a lifetime of service into a liability to be managed rather than honoured. Windsor Castle, in this context, becomes more than a location. It becomes a symbol of the final severing of trust. To be denied there is to be denied at the very heart of the institution that shaped him. It signals that the palace no longer believes reconciliation is possible without risk. And that belief changes everything, not just how Harry is treated, but how he is remembered. And no one inside the palace feels that loss of trust more sharply than the man Harry once stood beside. As Prince Harry stood outside the gates, his brother was somewhere inside those walls. Close enough to intervene, powerful enough to stop it, silent enough to let it happen. Whether by choice or by obligation, That silence may have been the loudest message of all. Speculation about William's awareness of the visit began almost immediately, because in a place like Windsor, nothing of this magnitude goes unnoticed. Messages move fast. Names travel faster. It is widely believed that William knew Harry was there, or at least knew soon enough to act. And that knowledge hangs heavy over the moment. Because if he knew, then the silence was not ignorance. It was a decision. One shaped by years of fracture, pressure, and a crown that demands restraint even when the heart wants otherwise. There are claims that William did not step in because he was advised not to. That intervention would only escalate a situation already deemed volatile. Advisors, aides, and institutional voices urging caution, reminding him that every move he makes is interpreted not as a brother but as a future king. In that environment, personal loyalty becomes a liability. Emotional instinct is treated as weakness, and so, silence becomes the safest option even when it costs something deeply personal. Over time, that emotional distance has hardened into something colder. What began as unresolved conflict has slowly transformed into institutional separation. William is no longer just Harry's brother inside the palace walls. He is part of the structure that now keeps Harry out. That shift is subtle, but devastating. It turns private pain into public policy. It allows absence to masquerade as neutrality, when in reality it functions as endorsement. Inside the palace, staff notice these things. Silence is read carefully. When William did not intervene, it was interpreted as approval not necessarily enthusiastic, but sufficient. In royal culture, inaction often speaks louder than defiance. By not stopping the denial, the message filtered downward that the decision stood. That no override was coming. That this was now the accepted position of the institution, not just a temporary stance. For Harry, the realization came slowly, then all at once. This wasn't just about security refusing entry. It was about the absence of the one person who could have changed the outcome. The brother who once stood beside him, who once shared the same burden, now separated by walls thicker than stone. In that moment, the possibility of quiet reconciliation seemed to dissolve entirely. Not because of anger, but because of distance that had become too wide to bridge. The most painful part is that this silence doesn't feel dramatic, it feels final. There is no argument to revisit, no door to knock on again. Just a quiet understanding settling in that whatever bond remained has been overtaken by duty, expectation, and fear of consequence. And when silence replaces confrontation, it often signals an ending rather than a pause. But William's silence wasn't the only absence Harry felt in that moment. As minutes passed and the gates stayed shut, Prince Harry did what any isolated man would do. He reached out. Calls went unanswered, messages unread. Inside Windsor Castle, phones remained silent. And with every passing second, the truth became harder to ignore. He was completely alone. At first, the attempts were restrained. A call placed with the quiet confidence of someone who still believed a familiar voice would answer. Then another. And another. Each unanswered ring carried more weight than the last. Senior royals who once picked up without hesitation now offered nothing but absence. The silence wasn't chaotic or accidental, it felt coordinated, deliberate, and unmistakably intentional. In a place where communication is tightly managed, unanswered calls are rarely coincidence. Behind the scenes, staff had already been instructed not to engage, not to acknowledge, not to relay messages upward. That instruction, subtle but firm, ensured that Harry's attempts would dissolve before they reached anyone with the authority to respond. It created a vacuum around him, one where every effort to connect was quietly absorbed and neutralized. The message was clear without being spoken. Do not intervene. Do not soften this moment. Let it stand. Security maintained their distance with practiced professionalism. No reassurance, no explanation, no quiet words of comfort. Their role had shifted from protection to enforcement, and that shift carried an emotional cost they were trained never to show. To Harry, that distance felt colder than the locked gates themselves. These were people who once knew his routines, his fears, his humor. Now they looked past him, as if proximity itself had become forbidden. What began as frustration slowly curdled into humiliation. Not the public kind, but the private kind that settles in the chest and stays there. The realization that no one was coming, that no call would be returned, that this moment was not temporary. Silence, in this context, functioned as punishment, a consequence designed not to shout, but to erode, to make him feel small without ever raising a voice. In the monarchy, silence has always been a tool. It withholds validation. It denies acknowledgement. It forces the recipient to sit with uncertainty and self-doubt. And for Harry, standing outside the place that once defined him, that silence spoke louder than any statement ever could. It suggested that his presence was no longer worth engaging with, that even rejection required no explanation. There came a moment quiet, almost imperceptible, when something shifted. The calls stopped, the phone lowered, not in anger, but in resignation. That was the moment witnesses describe as the turning point. The moment Harry reportedly turned away, not storming off, not making a scene, simply accepting that whatever he had hoped to resolve would not be resolved here. That act, turning away without a word, may prove to be one of the most powerful images of this entire episode. Because it wasn't defiance. It was recognition. Recognition that the door hadn't just been closed physically, but emotionally. And once that recognition settles in, it changes how everything that follows is interpreted. Yet what happened next may permanently alter how the world sees the monarchy. Moments like this don't stay hidden. Staff talk, drivers remember, guards notice. And within minutes, whispers began escaping the palace perimeter. By the time Harry's car pulled away, the story was already leaking, because too many people had seen too much. It started quietly, the way all palace scandals do. A few words exchanged under breath, a message sent and immediately deleted. A driver repeating what he witnessed to someone he trusted not to repeat it, who then did. Inside the institution, shock rippled outward, especially among junior staff who had never imagined seeing a prince treated as an outsider. For them, the monarchy had always been rigid, but never this stark, never this public. The idea that security physically blocked Prince Harry shattered assumptions many had carried since their first day on the job. Disbelief spread faster than protocol could contain it. Some questioned whether there had been a mistake, others wondered if they had misunderstood what they saw. But the consistency of the accounts made denial impossible. Multiple witnesses, independent of one another, describing the same cold refusal, the same unmoving stance, the same absence of intervention. Within moments, early versions of the story began circulating, each retelling, sharpening the edges, each whisper adding weight to the reality that this had actually happened. Inside the palace, fear followed closely behind shock. Not fear of Harry, but fear of fallout. Senior aides understood immediately how this would look if it escaped the walls. A prince denied entry to Windsor Castle is not a minor incident, it is a symbolic rupture. Phones lit up with urgent instructions. Keep quiet. Say nothing. Do not confirm. Do not deny. The familiar machinery of containment whirred into action, but this time it felt sluggish, overwhelmed by the speed at which the narrative was forming outside official channels. The problem was visibility. Too many people had been present, too many perspectives, too many angles. This wasn't a rumor that could be buried with a carefully worded briefing. It was an event, one that clashed violently with the image the monarchy works relentlessly to protect. For staff who had built their careers on discretion, This moment felt like standing on shifting ground. Loyalty pulled one way, conscience pulled another, and silence suddenly felt heavier than speech. As the palace scrambled to regain control, the story continued to evolve beyond its reach. Each retelling raised a darker question. If this could happen to Harry, what did that say about the institution itself? The denial was no longer just about one man, it was becoming a lens through which people re-examined power, punishment, and belonging within the royal family. And that reframing terrified those tasked with preserving the monarchy's authority. Containment requires time. Time to coordinate, time to smooth edges, time to redirect attention. But time was the one thing the palace didn't have, because the narrative was already moving, carried by shock and disbelief, gaining momentum with every whispered confirmation. But containment may already be impossible, because this wasn't just a denial, it was a declaration. This wasn't about one visit, it wasn't about protocol, it was about finality. When Windsor Castle closed its gates to Prince Harry, it signalled something far deeper, a severing not just of access, but of belonging. And once that line is crossed, there may be no return. Windsor Castle has always represented more than royal residence. It is the emotional anchor of the monarchy, the place where lineage quietly becomes legitimacy. To be welcomed there is to be acknowledged as part of the inner circle, not just by blood, but by trust. To be denied is to be told without ceremony that something essential has been withdrawn. In Harry's case, the denial transformed a private fracture into a symbolic exile. The gates didn't just close behind him, they closed on a version of his identity that had defined him since birth. Inside the palace, this moment quietly redefined who is considered inside and who now exists firmly on the outside. That distinction matters more than titles or appearances. It determines who is consulted, who is protected, and who is allowed proximity to power. By drawing this line so publicly, the monarchy reinforced a boundary that had previously been implied, but never enforced so starkly. It was a recalibration of belonging, and Harry found himself on the wrong side of it. The emotional cost of that realization is difficult to overstate. Harry's struggle has never been about status alone, it has been about identity. Being royal was not just his role, it was his language, his environment, his sense of place in the world. To have that connection formally withdrawn, even without words, fractures something fundamental. It forces a reckoning not just with the institution, but with self. Who are you when the place that shaped you no longer recognizes you as its own? Outside the palace walls, public perception began to shift almost immediately. Sympathy surged, not because Harry was denied entry, but because of how it happened. Quietly, firmly, without compassion. For many observers, this moment crystallized long simmering doubts about the monarchy's rigidity. For others, it confirmed that the institution will always choose preservation over people. Either way, the image of a prince turned away from Windsor reshaped the narrative in ways that cannot be easily undone. Internally, the monarchy appears to be hardening its stance. The denial set a precedent, and precedents inside royal culture carry enormous weight. Once enforced, they are rarely reversed. The institution thrives on consistency, even when that consistency is cruel. By allowing this moment to stand, the palace signaled that reconciliation, if it ever comes, will be on its terms alone and only after trust is rebuilt in silence, far from public view. There is an ominous sense that this was not a pause, but a conclusion. That the distance created here is not meant to be bridged quickly, if at all. The denial didn't resolve tension, it froze it in place. And frozen conflicts tend to endure, quietly reshaping relationships over time until estrangement becomes permanent, not dramatic, but normalized. And now, with the gates closed, the only question left is what Harry does next. Prince Harry left Windsor Castle without saying a word, but silence doesn't mean surrender. It means calculation. Somewhere beyond those gates, decisions are being weighed, emotions are settling, and consequences are forming. Because moments like this don't end stories, they ignite them. What happens after a door closes can matter more than the moment it shuts. As Harry departed, the absence of reaction was itself a statement. No outburst, no rebuttal, no immediate response. That restraint suggests something deeper at work, a recalibration of strategy shaped by years of experience and hard lessons learned. Those close to him speculate that this moment, painful as it was, may have clarified something essential. Not what he lost, but what he can still leverage. Silence becomes a tool when words have already been exhausted. Inside the palace, that same silence has triggered unease. There is a quiet fear that unresolved moments have a way of resurfacing in unexpected forms. Not through confrontation, but through exposure, through timing, through choices made far from palace corridors. The institution understands this risk well, which is why tension now lingers behind closed doors. Not panic, but vigilance. Because once someone decides they have nothing left to lose, the balance of power shifts. Emotional wounds, left unattended, often harden into resolve. For Harry, the humiliation of being denied access has not erased the years that led him there. It has distilled them. Pain has a way of sharpening priorities. What once felt confusing now appears starkly defined. Loyalty, exclusion, silence, control, these are no longer abstract ideas but lived experiences. And lived experiences tend to reshape how people move forward, not backward. The monarchy, meanwhile, braces itself. Institutions built on tradition often underestimate the long arc of consequence. They assume stability will absorb shock. But this moment pierced something deeper than optics. It challenged the narrative of unity and quiet reconciliation. Now advisors must weigh how rigid authority plays against growing public sympathy. Because while protocol may justify the decision internally, perception tells a different story externally, and perception has power. Public reaction has already begun to tilt. Not unanimously, not without division, but with a noticeable shift toward empathy. The image of exclusion resonates more than any explanation ever could. It invites questions the palace would rather not answer. Questions about belonging, about punishment, about whether rigidity protects tradition or slowly erodes it. And those questions don't fade quickly. They linger, gaining traction as silence persists. There is no neat resolution here. No official statement to wrap it up. No reconciliation montage waiting just off screen. What remains instead is uncertainty heavy, unresolved, and quietly volatile. Harry's next move may be private, or it may be public. It may come swiftly, or it may arrive after patience has done its work. But whatever form it takes, it will not be accidental. Because moments like this don't disappear. They settle. They ferment. They shape the future in ways that are rarely visible at first glance, and the monarchy knows this, even as it maintains its composure. What happened at Windsor was not an endpoint, it was a pivot. Because what happened 1 minute ago at Windsor Castle may echo through the monarchy for years to come. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.